you for joining me. Network has not allowed us to communicate. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Now let's get straight because of time. Now, what is driving the global shift towards digital and tokenized currencies?
So, fundamentally, payments in general down to a few things: liquidity, accessibility, and pricing. Digital assets, digital currencies tend to have, just given their global nature, right? Think of digital USD, for example, USDT, USDC, right? That poses like much more liquid USD than maybe regular bank USD, right, in the market. So what I mean by this is USDT is a form of US dollar, or USDC as a form of US dollar is a form of US dollar that is for anybody anywhere to access. It is liquid. It means that businesses can access millions and millions of dollars of this, at the snap of a finger. And it offers the best price. It means that if I wanted to pay someone in Hong Kong, in the UK, whatever, I'm better off converting my Naira to USDT and then converting that USDT to the other local currency, right? So those are some of the, the fundamentals there. It's cheaper, it's easier to access, and it's more liquid, right? So that's why, from a Nigeria-Africa point of view, it's important that we also sit up and play that global game. So otherwise, we end up losing out.
Okay. Now, how can digital currencies improve financial inclusion access around Africa?
100%. Digital currencies are, by their design and by their nature, much more accessible, much more liquid, right? So what that means is the technology stack you need as a fintech, for example, or as a microfinance bank, the technology stack you need to build around a digital currency or a digital asset is much cheaper than the technology stack you need to build around like fiat, normal traditional currencies, right? So if you think of a traditional currency, before I can build out my microfinance bank, plug into the central clearing system, which in Nigeria is called NIBS. If I can plug into NIBS, appear on NIB, position liquidity, all of that stuff, I would have spent like tens of millions of Naira, if not hundreds, right? On the flip side, I can build out a payment system based off of digital currencies with like 1 million Naira, right? And if I really know how to, if I'm a good software engineer, I might not even need to pay any actual fees to anybody. I might not need to position capital, right, as much. I basically become a broker for payments, right? So that's a very powerful idea, right? Because what that enables is it allows fintechs, it really reduces the barrier for entry, right, into creating these systems, into creating this product. It's much cheaper. And what that means is you can also, not just that someone in the middle of Sokoto can build out like a strong competitive payment system, but also that because the cost that it takes them to build and maintain that system is so minuscule, they can charge a very, very low fee, right, for their end user to access that system. So that ends up really dramatically driving down the barrier for entry and the accessibility of the systems. And of course, that drives usability and adoption, widely speaking.
Now, why is a Naira-backed digital payment system important for Nigeria's economy?
So I think, in summary, the fact of the matter is the world is moving on, right? If we don't play in that space, we're going to get left behind, more or less, right? First time I bought a digital asset myself was in 2016. And at that time, you had those exchanges. They had Naira. I think I bought through local Bitcoin at that time. They had Naira, Bitcoin, a digital asset. Today, we seem to have moved backwards, right? But today, on most of these asset exchanges, you literally need USD before you can even partake in that market. So what that means is first, I need to convert my Naira to USD, then use that USD to participate, in the digital assets market, right? That's, obviously not a good thing for the Naira. So for us, this was born really more out of patriotism than anything else, to say, why don't we have like Naira playing on the digital asset exchanges? Why are we encouraging, money first going to USD before Nigerians in Nigeria use it to participate? I mean, think about it. It's like you have to buy USD before you can buy a stock in the NGX. Do you know what I mean? Or before you can buy a stock in Chaka or Bamboo on RiseFest. That would be, a net negative for the Nigerian economy, right? Because I first take my Naira, buy USD, the final buy the final asset and buy. You have to understand, most people using digital assets in Nigeria are not using it for capital flights. They are using it to participate in the growing digital assets markets, right? Because digital assets as an asset class is one of the fastest growing asset classes in the world over the last 10 years, for sure, right? So you're seeing an asset class that has gone from functionally zero to trillions of dollars today. So of course, Nigerians want to participate in that market. But now they're basically forced to first convert their Naira to USD before they can participate in the digital asset market. So that's why it's critical for us to have Naira representation. That kind of enables, Nigerians to directly from Naira to participate in digital assets.
Now, what role do you think regulation play in the growth of digital financial innovation in Nigeria and largely in Africa?
Say everything. It's everything. A lot of the companies we have today, from money points of the world to interswitches, a lot of this really made progress under, say, Sanusi and Sanusi as CBN governor. So what that tells us is regulation plays a very big role in how markets evolve and in what market participants can do or are encouraged to do, right? Just think about it. There are so many moving parts. Right? As an entrepreneur, you're either putting your capital at risk, you're raising capital from others to build out your idea. You have to go to banks like large customers, right? And those large customers will never deal with you unless there's a go-ahead from the regulators, of course, right? And that's why for us, in everything we do, we try to ensure that we have that regulatory nod at least before we progress, right? Because it's so important. Like without it, you truly can't make progress, right? And the more friendly regulation is in a specific jurisdiction, the more you can do with investor, the more you can do with retail, the more you can do with institutional partners, right? Because even regular everyday consumers want to know that my government does not think this thing is illegal, right? So otherwise they won't use it, right? So there's even softer things around trust, around brand, around how the end users feel about the product beyond just hard end or arrest if you don't do, if you do. Even just softer things. I mean, those things are more important than some of the more hardline stuff. So yeah, very important that regulation is aligned. Very important that regulators support what you do, and even publicly speak for what we do, right? That's the only way this industry can progress.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. Let's talk a bit about Web3. You spoke about this during the Akwa Ibom Tech Week. I listened to you on stage then talk about it. Now, what opportunities does Web3 create for African fintech startups and developers?
So it just reduces the barrier for software development and access to capital. It really does. So blockchain, one, by its very nature, is global. So what that means is you, as a builder, as an entrepreneur, it's easier to access funding, easier to access grants, those stuff that things. But more importantly, you can now build out a software stack from the beginning to the end that is cheap and almost free to access, right? I don't know if you've tried to build like a software for a microfinance bank in Nigeria, but it's restrictively expensive, right? So you have to pay tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, depending on your context of Naira, to access like core banking software. And then you have to pay money to, to access NIP clearing system. There's a lot, right, that comes with these things. And then you have to pay money consistently for the maintenance of these things. On the other hand, with Web3 and blockchain-based systems, it's fairly cheap. Right? It's relatively easier to build and maintain payment rails, to build and maintain financial service rails, right? So that's the real attraction. That it just makes things much easier, much cheaper, much faster to do, right? So as an entrepreneur, you can build at like a fraction of the cost you'd have had to pay in the traditional system. So that's the real advantage of it.
Now, how can young Nigerians position themselves for careers in the emerging digital economy? How do you think they can do that?
Yeah, I think in general, my advice is always follow your interest. Always follow your interest. One wants to ask himself, what is the thing that I'm most interested in, right? Within the space, outside the space, but because when you follow your interest to the logical end, right? You're going to come up with conclusions that are aligned with progress, aligned with reality. And what I mean by this is, of course, everything is getting digitized. Right? So digitization is not happening in silos. So if you're interested in payments, if you're interested in finance, naturally the logical end of if you think through what does finance look like in 10 years, what does payment look like in 15, 20 years, the natural conclusion is that blockchain is going to play a very big role. Right? So my advice is first follow your interest. Let your interest guide you, right? Because it would naturally take you to like reasonable conclusions. If you think about things, you have to think about things from first principles, right? So follow your interest. Don't do things because you feel like this is where everybody is now. This is where the money is. This is what everybody's doing now. Let me jump in. Stay put where you are. If you're focused on AI, you're focused on trading, whatever you're focused on, just stay with it. But try to understand the fundamentals of the thing you're interested in, right? Try to understand what makes this thing work. Why does this thing work? Why is there so much global interest in this thing? Why is BlackRock using blockchain? Right? Why is Fidelity using blockchain? Just naturally ask those important questions. And then you end up coming to conclusions that work for you, and that's it. Can you hear me, Paul? Looks like the internet is so.
Let me ask you this because of time. What are the major challenges facing digital currency adoption in Africa? What do you think are the challenges?
So I think Africa, we have the culture of throwing away the baby with the bathwater, if you like, right? So because, for example, first time Bitcoin became really popular in Nigeria, probably around 2016, 2017, during like the MMM period, right? So because the first kind of national recognition of Bitcoin was as a tool to, partake in MMM. A lot of people have now, theoretically thrown away the baby and the water that used to bathe the baby, right? Because they now just assume because Bitcoin was used by bad actors in a Ponzi scheme, then Bitcoin itself is a Ponzi scheme. And then most Nigerians are just not interested in learning further or hearing anything or getting deeper into it, right? And naturally, obviously, digital assets, the blockchain space has evolved a lot from the days of Bitcoin, right? There's so much now built on top of it. But because people just have that skepticism around Bitcoin, right? or around digital assets from the early days, and which is I think is true for almost any industry, where as the industry starts out, bad actors are likely the first people to adopt it, right? Initially, well, one of the first people to adopt it. So what technically happens is if you're not careful and you go into an industry early, as Nigeria did, right, in the early days of Bitcoin, and then you see that, I mean, there are plenty of bad actors here, or probably run away, but then you never spend time to like really dissect what's going on. Is there any real advantage here beyond what I'm seeing, beyond what I've lost? What are the fundamentals of this industry? So I think that's the first and most important barrier. It's just is in our mind. People are skeptical because of one episode that happened maybe 10, 11 years ago now. And we have to overcome that to be able to participate in this global industry.
Now, what security measures are necessary to protect users and financial systems in a digital currency ecosystem?
Come on, there are so many. There are so many. I think for us in particular,
you could just give us a few of them. I think we'll be okay with that.
Because we have a background in supporting law enforcement and investigations, right? So for us coming into this space, first and foremost, was from the point of view of security, right? What security measures need to be implemented? Again, most of this does not concern the end user, right? Most of this is those back-end hardcore engineering, right? So you have HSM, you have MPC wallets. There are all the different systems where you concretely make sure that fraud is almost impossible to do within your system, right? But then on the front end, it's just education, right? Our job is to continue to educate users, right? Nobody will ever ask you for your PIN. I just see banks do it a lot, right? Nobody ever asks for your PIN over email. Nobody asks for your OTP. Just education. Because as with any new technology, users are often very confused about what's going on. Am I supposed to do this? They don't even know what they are supposed to do or not do. So as an industry, we have a lot of work to do with education. And that's why for us, we spent the last few years educating, right? From the public, but also even the government, right? We spend a lot of time educating the government, not just in Nigeria. We just came back from East Africa, where 2 weeks ago, we educated all of the banks in East Africa, right? The central bank in East Africa, the Capital Markets Authority, they've all come to our office here in Abuja, right? Just to get some perspective on the ecosystem. So spend a lot of our time educating regulators, right? Educating law enforcement, and then educating private sector players, banks, educating retail, everybody. But with blockchain technology, everything is transparent, everything is open, everything is shared. So there's, just to dispel people's thoughts, there's no transaction you can do on a blockchain that cannot be tracked. There's no transaction you can do on a blockchain that cannot be seen publicly. So contrary to popular opinion, it's easier to commit fraud in the banking system than in like Web3 or digital assets. In a sense, right? It's easier to commit a perfect fraud, let me say, to commit fraud where nobody else has access to or insights into what happened, right? Than in Web3. It's almost impossible to do that in Web3. You can't hide. It's a publicly shared database.
Interesting. Now, my final question to you before we run out because of time and the network issues. I really thank you for staying put with me here. Now, how can Nigeria leverage digital payment innovation to become a major player in the global digital economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I would say I'm optimistic. There's a reason being the Nigerian spirit to start with, right? Nigerians are very excited about this thing. Nigerians can't live digital assets, right? They love it. We are one of the most important players as a country in digital asset space, right? So that's first and foremost. That's an entrepreneurial spirit that's just never going to die. That's the first cause for optimism, and I think that's how you win, right? That's how you win, by having like a mass of people with that energy, right? With that vibrancy towards this one goal. So I think in that one, check, right? Two would be regulation, right? And for that, it's still, things are still not exactly clear. We're kind of watching to see what comes out in broadly speaking, this year. And then three would be institutional involvement, right? Because in countries like America, you already have some of the biggest institutions in the world participating in digital assets, right? You have BlackRock, you have Apollo. Apollo is a $700 billion fund, right? BlackRock is maybe like $12 trillion, more than probably the entire GDP of Africa, right? So you have those large corporates already participating in this market. But then in places like Nigeria and the rest of Africa, corporates are still afraid of participating, right? So it's like, what are we afraid of if, companies, corporates globally that have the GDP of the whole Africa are participating in this same market? Like, who are we? Like, what's the thing that we're worried about? You understand? So yeah, that'll be the last thing, corporates. But I think naturally, a lot of corporates are getting prepared. They're getting ready. I'm aware that there's a lot of training ongoing. There's a lot of learning, research, putting papers together. And I believe that once the regulatory posture is a little clearer, we're going to see influx of corporates participation in the space as well. So yeah, so I think we're in a good place. Sometimes it's not so easy to be optimistic about things going on in Nigeria, but it's very important that we remain optimistic and remain excited about the future. And I think we're in a good place. And I think that Nigeria as a market will continue to evolve.
Uyoyo Ogedegbe, Managing Director of cNGN, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Very grateful.